Hi, it's Robert Mendelson, Fractional CMO here in beautiful Montreal, welcoming you to another episode of the Fractional Pros Canada podcast. We're part of Fractional Pros Canada, the home for Canada's fractional community, and you can find us on Facebook. We bring you conversations about everything fractional that matters for fractional executives and businesses from coast to coast. Think of this as your go-to spot for real talk, practical wisdom, and strategies you can actually use, all without the corporate fluff and with plenty of Canadian content. Whether you're a fractional pro or a business in our great country of Canada and beyond, this conversation is for you. Grab your espresso and let's dive in. Welcome to the Fractional Pros Canada podcast. I'm your host and fractional CMO, Robert Mendelson, here in beautiful Montreal. Today's Fractional Pros Canada podcast is powered by Fractional Pros Canada, the only Canadian online community for Canada's fractional executives. Join us on our Facebook group. Just search for Fractional Pros Canada on Facebook. Joining me today is Mark Powell in beautiful Bridgewater, Nova Scotia. Mark provides fractional integrator support for companies running on EOS that either lack the resources for a full-time integrator or need help adapting the EOS process for remote work. Mark, great to have you on the Pros Pod.
Thank you for inviting me, and thank you for allowing me to talk on your podcast here and talk a little bit about the work we do and where we can help businesses.
All right, pleasure. Well, thank you for being here. I've got my my Canadiana all fired up here to keep me company. So, Mark, you and I talked a little while ago about something really interesting that struck me. We were talking, of course, one of the big topics of the day about tariffs and how it's affecting businesses. And you were mentioning something that I hadn't thought of because I'm so stuck inside, I guess, the Canada-centric bubble that we're all stuck in on this side of the border. You're talking about how businesses on both sides of the border are getting hit by tariffs and being affected by the market shifts that result. So maybe you can kick us off by sharing some of those real world stories of, clients that you have or you've worked with recently who are on both sides of the border who are feeling the effects of the tariffs.
Sure. I think it's a great starting point. So what we've done over the last month or so is gone back to previous clients and existing clients to understand how the market changes affected your business. What's going on now that wasn't there before? What are some of the things you've learned? What have you adapted? What are your best practices? And a lot has changed even when you and I last spoke, where in the past, our clients in the US were somewhat phlegmatic. This is okay, nothing to worry about. We'll just continue on the path. And then on the Canadian side, our clients were really concerned. I think that's partly because we're always been the mouse sleeping beside the elephant and what happens when the elephant rolls over. So that was the case a month ago. It's changed differently with the clients south of the border as well, recognizing that actually they need to do something and that the businesses and then markets and the client and the business marketplace around them is changing and they're feeling a little out of control.
Yeah, and let's just, for the record, today we're recording this on April 7th. So the big tariffs, so-called Liberation Day was 5 days ago, April 2nd. So it's a whole new landscape now. And by the time the podcast comes out, who knows what will have changed since now. But to give that context, so what's your main focus with the leadership team when you first start working with a company who's dealing with this kind of shock, this kind of coming out of left field, and there's no playbook for this. So what's your first course of action?
So what we've observed now is there's a lot of consistently within both sides of the border with the leadership teams, there's lots of anger and frustration. There's lots of objectification in terms of trying to blame things that are out of their control. And there's a sense, certainly as a loss of control. No one knows what's going to happen next. No one can anticipate. And for business leaders that have been, running their businesses for decades, or even just startups, they don't know what to do. And I think if you look at the communication strategies that are going out there, there's just an overload of information. There's a lack of clarity. There's a lack of focus. So for us is to look at them and say, well, do you still have a plan? Are you still working to the plan? Are you still meeting consistently as a team? Are you still communicating well? And just going back to some of the fundamentals, because we've been through this before. This is not new. It's just really understanding what are the core things you need to focus on to be able to not only to consolidate where you are within the organization, but also look at the relative roles. The visionary has a really important role right now. The leadership team has a really important role right now. And there's also part of that is to connect those together and understand where are the gaps, because there's some great opportunities.
And it's important that you mentioned that, first there's this wave of anxiety, of anger, all these emotions come up, which is a perfectly normal, human reaction to what's going on. But the leadership team needs to be able to get past that and, look at the data, right? It's always the best course of action. Always look at the data, look at the realities, look at the facts, and then see what we need to do from there. And so I think you were hinting at that, a company should already have a strategy in place before anything is like this has happened. There should be a plan. There should be a vision, the 1 year, the 3 year, the 5 year, whatever it is. So do you suggest to them, first keep sticking to the plan until we figure out something that needs to change, and make sure that those decisions as far as what needs to change are grounded in some kind of data, instead of just trying to, in a panic situation, figure out, oh my God, what do we do? And let's just pick a direction and try it and fail fast?
Yes, I think to step back a little bit is recognizing that with small, medium businesses, the clients that we focus on is typically the owner of the business, or the founder of the business. Typically, they're really good at their thing. They're just not so good at getting things done. So from that perspective, really going back to, and now is a great time to make change, right? When things are going well, no one wants to change anything. Now, as all this stuff is flying around and there's a need for clarity, now is a good time to put some of these fundamentals in place, which is, do you have a good plan? Are you measuring the right thing? Is your organization set up properly so you have the right people in the right place? Do you have good processes? Are you measuring the right things you need to measure, and are you figuring out a way to solve problems? Those are those fundamentals. It doesn't have to be complicated. The right plan can be just a 2-page plan. An organizational chart is just a simple chart, but it's really understanding those pieces that you need to work from, and then be able to work in 90-day cycles. We don't need to solve this problem for everyone else. We just need to work in chunks that are realistic for ourselves.
So is that the recipe for being proactive instead of reactive?
Yes. One of the things I thought was really interesting with a firm that we work with who manufactures windows and doors is they decided, and it's a great growth in the organization where they used to react until we helped them get set up and set a plan. They just waited to see what their competition would do. So the competition was dropping their prices, and everyone else is following. And they said, no, we're just going to wait. And then they went back to their clients and said, we are going to honor our previous pricing structure from before, and we will protect the quotes that you had given us from before, and we will not increase our prices. So actually everyone was increasing their prices, because of the tariffs, and we are not going to increase our prices for the next 90 days because we respect the relationship that we have with you. So the biggest learning from there was to be patient and not to react. I think that's the one message right now is do not react. You have a plan. Let's work to the plan.
That's really interesting. So the company that did not increase their prices, at least for next 90 days, did their costs increase, or were those costs coming down the road because they'd already inventoried up so they were safe for the next 90 days?
What they did is they went back to their suppliers and said, listen, we're in this together, right? So can you give us price protection for a certain period of time? You had already quoted us in certain contracts that were good for 45 days. So will you still honor those contracts, and recognize that if we work together as suppliers for our clients and we serve our clients better, we will continue to have good clients.
So that really speaks to the strength of relationships that a company has with its vendors. And I'll bet there's a lot of businesses and fractionals too, working with businesses who probably say to themselves, well, if we go to the vendors and ask them to help us out here, they're not going to help us. They're in the same boat. They're not going to absorb these costs. So we're not even going to bother.
Yes, I like what you're saying. I think from a relationship perspective, just recognizing that communicating well is key right now. However, you need to communicate with clarity, and that means the leadership team should be meeting on a weekly basis, measuring their performance, keeping each other accountable in terms of how they're tracking on to-dos, and understand then how you're going to communicate that internally, but also out to your customers and your clients. I think creating that sense of certainty and relationship is what is going to separate businesses out from the ones that succeed from the others that don't. I think also, though, in the role of the visionary is keep looking for the gaps. What are the things now that we weren't doing before that we can do now because there's opportunities that have opened up that we weren't aware of before.
So we're at this critical moment of the hindsight is 2020. Well, now we've got the 2020. Let's take a look and see where were our blind spots, and this is a great opportunity to focus on correcting them.
Yes, and looking for leverage. And as much as it's important to have the right people in the right seats, and I think this is a key role for fractional integrators, is how do you get the most of your fractional integrators and your fractionals? Because that's that level of expertise that you can buy a piece of to help move the business forward and create leverage from them. So being able to go to your fractionals to say, where do we grow from here? Where do we actually create leverage and capacity that we didn't have before?
How do you handle, or how do you, coach or suggest to an executive team that has, let's say, one person on the team who's just in total panic mode? They don't see a way out of this. They don't see the light at the end of the tunnel. They just see bad. They see, profits falling, and their instinct, their recommendation to the C-suite is, we need to freeze all our expenses. We need to just wait and see what happens instead of actually taking any action. What do you tell somebody like this on an executive team who's in that freeze mode?
I think it's really important in what we do in meeting with the teams on a weekly basis is that we raise the issues. So let's raise the issues and understand what they are, and that includes everyone, and then let's work through the issues together. Recognizing in this process here, because often what happens is the visionary wants to step in and fix things, is realize as a team, we're deciding as a team what is the right approach to take for this, and to trust the team in making those decisions, not to defer to the individual, and then to go back to the individual and sit down. And what we do with our clients is we meet with the leadership teams also one-on-one to say, what's going on here? What are some of the things that we need to figure out for you to make you feel more comfortable in what you're doing? Because usually there's something underneath that we're not getting to.
So this is as much it's called a litmus test of how good relationships are with vendors as how good the right people in the right seats are. And if you have somebody on your executive team who, we were just talking about, and the rest of the team is like, we're moving in this direction, but that other person is just completely opposed and doesn't agree. Is this the right time to kind of make a mental note, and maybe when things settle down, it's time to swap out somebody from the wrong person in the wrong seat?
Yes, I mean, there are some great tools that you can use in terms of look whether the person gets it, wants it, has the capacity. However, uh, my feeling is, and working with some of the people within Game Plan, we have James and Kobe are particularly good around people and culture, is recognizing this is more than an individual issue. And let's look at the people and culture itself as well, because it's really important to ensure that you have room for dissension and argument and competition. This is where you start putting things up in the air and really understanding, asking the difficult questions, which is the role of the fractional integrators. Is that certainly challenging, especially the visionary going, is that really the case? Or are you just saying that because you've said that before, for example?
Yeah, it's a great point. So there's nothing wrong with having opposing views around the table. In fact, that's healthy discussion, as long as it's not coming across in unhealthy arguments, shall we say. But keeping that communication key, open communication, letting people express how they're feeling, what their thoughts are, but then always coming back to the collective wisdom of making the tough decision. And I guess in these times, there's going to be a higher propensity of dissenting views and opposing views than ever before. And more, probably the CEO is going to be the one who's going to have to break the tie.
Yes. Um, what comes to mind in listening to what you're saying, and I appreciate the questions you're asking, what you're bringing forward, is we're going into and we're planning and getting ready for these quarterly meetings with our clients, which are day-long planning sessions. And one of the tools we want to go through with everyone is a tool called the clarity break, which is the clarity break is, you know what, let's just pause. Let's just take a break, step outside the room, and go through what we need to understand where we need to be. Take a breath. And I think that's really important, even from the metaphor of training for a competition, is recognizing that the most important part of training is actually resting. And sometimes you need just to stop and pause, and maybe it's just you need to take a day off.
Tell us more about how that clarity break works. Is that a day-long session that you do for that?
15 minutes. It's just
15
minutes just to check in and say, how are you doing? Just have a quick look at what are some of the issues? What are some of the to-dos that we need to work through? Are you effective in terms of how you communicate with your leadership team? Are you listening to them? Are they bringing things forward? So we just work through a simple little pattern. And that clarity break is so simple that as a tool, a manager can actually do that with their staff. Because we need to recognize that what's going on from a leadership team perspective is happening throughout the company.
It's great. Just hit the pause, even for just 15 minutes, and kind of try to get outside of the forest and be able to see the trees and just observe what's going on.
And recognize that the greatest asset of any organization are the people. And often that's what we forget about. And recognizing that leader who's having a difficult time, it may be because their spouse has lost their job, or there's something else underneath here, because this is not unique to just the business. It's a global challenge right now. So there's so many other pieces underneath where you need to just take a quick break, see what's going on, and and often, as I said before, get to the underneath of all this.
If you think about some of the companies you've helped, are there any big aha moments that you can think of that your companies had while you're working with them?
Yes. So part of this is following the process. I think that consistency is really important because it helps build a level of trust and connection. You're still meeting with the leadership team on a weekly basis to run their 90-minute meetings. We are still making sure that we're meeting with the individuals to make sure that they're accountable, and they are still following the process with their team out of that. And just trusting the process and trusting the team. The other thing for me, though, is because I work most closely with the visionaries, is to crack the whip with the visionaries, saying, okay, so what are your big new markets? What are your big new opportunities? What are your big new communities? This is now not the time for complacency. You are driving the front of the business. It's time to get on your horse and let's get going here. So for me, it's working very closely with the visionaries, sometimes on a weekly basis, that we're getting ready for the quarterly meetings, saying, what are you bringing to us that we can work with? Because it's time.
So this is the time for the visionaries to do what they do best, which is vision, which is see, what do you see as coming down the pipeline, and what are your creative solutions for it? And what do you do? In my experience, I've worked with a number of visionaries, and one of the biggest challenges always is visionaries typically have great vision, but it's inside their head. And the challenge is to get it out of their head. What are some of the tricks and tips and techniques that you use to extract that value out of the visionary's head?
I love that question, because one of the things where we go outside of what the world of EOS does is it doesn't say so really well how a visionary and the fractional integrator are supposed to work together. How do you get the most out of the visionary? So we've created a template, which is basically when you come up with a big idea, and we use a tool called 90, and we've got a template to track that in there. We bring you bring your big idea forward. So does it fit within the VTO? Is there this existing rock that goes with that? Are there specific measurables that go with that? Who's going to be doing this? What are the timelines? So we sort of break this down over the period of the quarter and build it out, because not all the big ideas are good ideas, and take them through this filtering process. So they understand then when it comes to the quarterly meeting is that the visionary is going to bring the best of their visions to the leadership team as potential rocks to say, should we be doing this? And then the team gets to vet that as part of the process.
Nice. So you get it, you get that vision out of the visionary's head, and then there's already a system, so to speak, to vet, is it a good idea or not? Does it make sense for the business?
Yes, and my role then, and of any good fractional integrator, is to take the visionary and join the visionary to the team. We are the sort of the meat in the sandwich there to make sure that stuff works.
Nice. Let's talk about knowing when more help is needed. So sometimes tackling one big issue can make you realize you need all kinds of different help as well, different expertise. It's kind of like different tools for different parts of the installation or assembly of a piece of furniture or whatever it is. So when you're working with leaders, how often do you see that they also need some kind of specific support? Maybe it's an expert with marketing, maybe it's an expert with finances. And how do you handle that? What does that typically look like when you recommend bringing in other specialists?
It shouldn't be a surprise that you need new people. If you've taken the time at the beginning of the annual and setting in the annual meeting, the beginning of the year to say, what is the accountability chart going to look like by the end of the year? What are the seats that we're going to need? What are those roles and responsibilities? With people within the existing team, if they are working to the best of their capacity in terms of from the delegate and elevate perspective. In other words, they're spending 80% of their time doing the things that they like and that they're good at, and that 10% of the time they're working out the things that they're good at but they don't enjoy, and the other 10% has been farmed off. If you've gone through that, you should know what are the seats you're going to need to have, and then also understanding with whoever's within the leadership team, what is the ramp? How long is it going to take to get that person on board? And with the measurables are set properly, we should know in the world of EOS, when your team is working consistently above 80% of their capacity, say for 1 or 2 months, it's time to start looking for someone else.
Okay, so that's that line, that's that threshold, 80%. Once you're past that 80%, you've been pushing things to the limit, but you don't want to get it past that 80% because then it's going to be counterproductive. People are overloaded, capacity is too squeezed, and productivity is going to be affected.
Yes. However, what's happening now is this is also an opportunity where people start looking for jobs outside the business. So how do you anticipate what's going to happen and we had this happen with a client in Texas, where their VP of manufacturing, we needed them to go quickly. We found out that they were doing some things which sort of breached the values of the organization and needed to go. So how are we going to fill that person's role quickly? And so that's where we had already identified where potential new candidates would be coming in, that we had someone who could ramp up fairly quickly.
Yeah, I guess that's an additional dimension that companies have to grapple with right now because of all the uncertainty. There's probably more than one C-suite executive who's thinking, they're looking at the trends and they're looking at what's going on. They're thinking, my job might be at risk. I better start, polishing up that CV.
Yeah. About a third right now, your third of your workforce is at risk.
So I guess that's the bad news. The good news is that if you need to replace somebody, it's probably, let's say, not the worst time to have a good pool of talent to choose from.
Has and also in the work that we do, being able to anticipate that this person's is looking to leave and has made that apparent to us. And so we're going to make this a nice little exit for them and an entry for someone else. So this doesn't have to be dramatic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. It can be a smooth exit and a smooth entry, smooth replacement.
Oh.
For any business owner or fractional pro listening right now who's super stressed about all the market uncertainty and everything going on, what's the single most important piece of advice that you would give them right now?
I think is don't panic, work to the plan. If you don't have a plan, now's a good time to get a plan, but it's not complex. There's no need to rush into anything right now if you have the fundamentals in place, because this turmoil that we're going through is going to last for 4 years at least. So we've got 4 years. We need to get started. Do not delay. Start today. But we have 4 years to work this out, and we're not aiming for perfection. We want to get to 80%. We know when we're going to get to that 80%. There's a beautiful tool called the organizational checkup that's part of EOS that allows us to identify what are we good at, what are we not good at, what do we need to improve on for the next quarter. So I think just working to a good process and methodology, which unfortunately many small businesses don't have, or medium-sized businesses don't have, but it's really if you're willing to let go of the rope and look at some outside resources, now is a good time to bring in a fractional integrator.
And are you seeing any experts, so-called experts, popping up in the marketplace who are trying to capitalize on the anxiety of companies and presenting themselves as the problem solver for, tariffs, et cetera, who are selling, a false bill of goods, so to speak?
Yes. There's lots of experts out there. It's a hard question to answer because how do you, oh, there we go. There's the answer. How do you know who are the people you trust and who you can work with? We know that referrals are always there. Someone we know that we should be talking to. If you're needing some good process or good system or good model, there's lots of good ones out there. EOS works well. Pick one. Ask and talk to your colleagues. Well, what is working well for them? What is the process that they're using? Who are the people that they're working with?
Sounds like the overarching theme of good practices, best practices right now, with all the uncertainty, comes back to communication. Good communication with your team, with your staff, and with your colleagues, and keeping in touch, sharing what's working, what's not, staying focused, and trying to benefit as much as possible from understanding really what's going on, taking that step back a little bit, taking that pause, and making rational decisions.
Yes, I think, as I said, working to a plan, working with the people that you have, the core of your business. I think that's an initial good first step, just to do a bit of a reset, which is what a quarterly meeting is all about. And then start looking to the outside to say, there's lots of gaps for those businesses that are well situated and have a good process running. There's some really good business opportunities out there. For example, we have a client who's a very successful daycare center in DC. And what's happening is they're independent. A lot of the chains are closing their daycare centers down because the government subsidies are gone. And we basically said, so I think it's time now to go to those parents of the daycare centers and say, we're here, we're local, we're not going anywhere, come and join us. And that has worked very well.
Mark, this has been a great conversation, and we've packed a lot of, I think, good ideas for businesses and fractionals to take away from here. Where can people find out more about what you do and connect with you?
Thank you for asking. You can go to gameplan.ceo. You can, and to the larger team, which is fractional-integrators.com. In each case, what we have are seasoned professionals. If you look at within fractionalintegrators.com, is the fact that those are people who've been in industry. We've been running our own businesses and had businesses for at least 30 years. If you looked at the team within gameplan.ceo, what we've done there is we realize that often businesses need more than what EOS can do. So we have someone who's a CMO, Chief Marketing Officer from the digital marketing world, which is you have to be a player in that place. We have a team that is really good around people and culture, because businesses is more than just payroll and benefits and hiring and firing. We have someone who's really good at operations and process, because you need to have a good engine to go going at all at the same time. And then we have someone who's really good at people and policy, because at some point you need to be able to show to people that you're a well-run organization.
Nice. Sounds like a lot of great resources for businesses to check out. Yep. Thanks again, Mark, for this great, insightful discussion.
I appreciate your time, and look forward to hearing any of the comments and feedback that come out of this.
That's a wrap on another episode of the Fractional Pros Canada podcast. If you're a fractional professional based in Canada, we'd love to have you join us in the Fractional Pros Canada Facebook group, the home for Canada's fractional community. It's where Canadian fractional executives connect, share insights, and help each other succeed. Until next time, I'm Robert Mendelson, Fractional CMO. May your impact be full-time, even if your hours are fractional.